My name is Joe St. Julian, and I'm the president of the nuclear sector at AtkinsRéalis. AtkinsRéalis is an engineering service and nuclear company headquartered in Montreal, Quebec. We're dedicated to transforming the energy and infrastructure systems worldwide to improve the way we're housed, powered, protected, and connected. It's great to be with you all today here in Toronto. And I know that many of you in attendance here today have come from around the world because of your interest in nuclear power. And this is an exciting time for nuclear. So I've been in the nuclear industry for 30 years, and this is the most, I would say, the best nuclear market we've seen in 40 years. And we're truly in a super cycle. People call it the nuclear renaissance. I think it's a super cycle. The renaissances have started and have had false starts in the past. This super cycle is here to stay. And you can tell it's a super cycle when you see capital flowing into the markets, and capital is flowing. So at AtkinsRéalis, nuclear is the fastest growing part of our business. In the last 2.5 years since I've joined, we have doubled our workforce in nuclear. We're now 5,000 people in our nuclear business, and we've doubled the workforce because our workload has doubled. So you double the workload in 2.5 years, it's very difficult, but we are resourcing and we are taking on the nuclear super cycle to the best of our ability. And so where's the super cycle demand coming from? Right? And it's not just about extending existing nuclear assets. I mean, there are a lot of nuclear assets on the planet today that are getting life extended. They're end of life, and there's big investment in extending those assets so that they can run for another 30 years. But the real super cycle is coming in the interest of new builds, building new nuclear power plants, not only in Canada, but around the world. And last year I was at COP28, which was in Dubai, and many of you probably know at COP28, 22 countries signed a pledge to triple their nuclear power by 2050. And that pledge is really being driven by net zero. I think countries, governments, utilities, stakeholders around the world are recognizing that energy, electricity is 85% base load from fossil power, and it needs to be replaced, and the best stable power to replace it, we call it base load power, is nuclear. And AtkinsRéalis signed on to the private sector equivalent of this pledge, which promises to do its part to support the utilities and governments around the world. I'll tell you, when you look at the regional variations, there's macro and systemic factors that are driving this demand. Obviously, electrification of transportation, EV cars. We're seeing population growth. Obviously, we're retiring the polluting assets that are producing electricity today. The electrification of heavy industries like steel and cement production, which we're already seeing here in Ontario today. And the rapid build, and we're going to talk a little bit about this in a minute, but the rapid build out to support AI and data centers. AI and data centers are huge electricity consumers, and it's revolutionizing the way that nuclear power is actually coming to the market. And in all those instances, why nuclear becomes attractive, obviously it doesn't have CO2 emissions, but it's attractive because it's a base load power generator. So you have to have on-demand 24/7 base load, and then you put intermittent load on top of it. This is wind and solar, those things that are intermittent in nature. But you also have to have on-demand power, and nuclear fits best for that. Hydro is also another aspect of base load, but nuclear has some things about it that make it unique and make it more attractive. So all of these things are coming together in a way that are propelling this market forward. I mentioned AI. You've probably noticed recently, the large AI companies or the large tech companies coming out and actually signing purchase power agreements with what used to be end of life assets. So Microsoft came out and said, we're going to do a purchase power agreement to actually restart units 1 and 2 at 3 Mile Island that have been cold and dark for years now. Google has come out and they're going to do 7 SMRs. So now we're seeing for the first time where the real energy consumers are actually wanting to buy, own, and control their assets rather than go through utilities. And I'm not saying that is going to be the way of the future in industry or technology companies, but it is going to be a factor. Utilities are going to work side by side with these companies, and I think it's great for people that are interested in nuclear power. So, countries like Canada, the US, France, Romania have already committed to nuclear power. And Poland, Thailand, Vietnam, the Philippines, Australia have expressed interest in nuclear power. So at AtkinsRéalis, we are the original equipment, we call it OEM, the original equipment manufacturer for Candu. That technology is owned by the Canadian government, and it was developed here in Canada starting in the 1950s. And 35 Candu nuclear power plants were built in that time period from basically 1970 to 2007. 27 of those plants are still in operation today. And all of those plants are being life extended because the technology is robust. And you saw on the video, 60% of Ontario's power comes from Candu and 15% of Canada's power comes from Candu. And not only do we power Canada, we're actually built Candus in 5 other countries. So it's an export technology for the citizens of Canada as well. And so what makes the Candu special? And there's a lot of things about it. I think it is an amazing accomplishment of scientific ingenuity, the ingenuity of the scientific community here in Canada. I think it is a very special technology. But the thing that we talk about most often is it's natural uranium. So there are 6 large reactor technologies that are commercially available in the world today. There used to be a lot more. They've come and gone. They're out of business. There's 6 of them that are still here today. The Japanese are probably going to come back, so there might be 7. But of all of those reactor technologies, Candu is the only one that uses natural uranium, which means we don't have to enrich uranium. We can actually mine uranium, package it, and put it in our reactors, and we don't have to pay for the expense or the security of enriched uranium, which has real proliferation issues as well. The second thing that's becoming a bigger and bigger issue is the Candu as a reactor allows you to actually make medical isotopes. Now, when I first started in this business, you either built new assets or you were on the kind of decommissioning side, taking end-of-life assets out of service. There's this emerging field, and it's started 30 years ago, but it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue, is how do you irradiate isotopes so that you can use them for medical treatment, really for cancer treatments. And it's proven and it's becoming more and more prolific. In the Candu reactor, you can actually create medical isotopes as a byproduct, a free byproduct of generating electricity. It's the only nuclear technology like it. Most often you make medical isotopes through ion exchange and some other things, but this is a really volumetrically and inexpensive way to make those isotopes, and those things become more and more in demand. A Candu is going to be more and more attractive because it's not only about electricity, it's also about medical treatments. The other thing that makes Candu unique is its online fueling. So we actually refuel continuously in a Candu reactor while it's producing electricity. All the other reactor technologies go offline and they have to refuel every 12 to 18 months, depending on the technology. We actually go offline once every 5 years. And because of that, we have a very high capacity factor, which means we are producing electricity to the nameplate 97% of the time. The nameplate is the output. that is established at the asset when you build it, which makes us really attractive from a levelized cost of electricity standpoint. So energy security with enriched uranium, medical isotopes, and obviously we have a very competitive cost of producing a megawatt hour relative to the rest of the technologies we're competing against. And all those technologies are great, by the way. So in addition, we have, in addition to this large technology, we also support SMRs. So AtkinsRéalis, OEM of the Candu technology, but we're supporting SMRs. And so we're supporting GE Hitachi and the BWRX 300, a 300 megawatt SMR that's going to be built here in Toronto as serial number 1, the first SMR that's going to go into service in North America. And so we're working with GE Hitachi on their technology, but we're also working with Rolls-Royce in the UK to bring their technology to market. So although we're an OEM, we're also kind of SMR technology agnostic and play in the small reactor market. And a lot of people say, well, is it what an SMR versus a large reactor? And I would tell you, we use this tagline, big and small, we need them all. And there are characteristics about markets, grid, how it's being used that would put you in the large reactor, and there's certain things that would put you in a small reactor. So we want to play in both of those because we think they're both hugely important to the nuclear super cycle. In addition to being the OEM and working SMRs, we actually support EDF, which is one of these 5, 6, 7 large technologies on their European pressure reactor. It's a light water reactor. This is the French technology. And we're an engineer of record with them at Hinkley Point C and Sizewell C and EPR2 in France. So we're kind of an OEM. We help our competitors, and we also actually work in the SMR markets. So I want to say one last thing before I introduce the next speaker. So right now today at AtkinsRéalis, again, we're standing on the shoulders of 70 years of R&T, research and technology investment by this country in this technology called Candu. And we're actually evolving that technology to the next generation we call the Monarch. So the Monarch is a full gigawatt scale Candu reactor. Right now, the Candu reactors are 750 megawatts, but we recognize the utilities want higher energy density. So we're taking that existing technology and we're uprating it. And we're in the process of doing that today to get it licensed in Canada and to export around the world. So when you hear the Monarch is the full gigawatt scale Candu. It's the next generation of this great technology that the Canadian scientific community established for this country back in the 50s. And with that, I'm going to introduce the next speaker. So I now have the pleasure of introducing the Honorable Stephen Lecce, Minister of Energy and Electrification for the province of Ontario and a member of provincial parliament for the riding of King Vaughan. I've had the distinct honor and pleasure of getting to know Minister Lecce since his appointment as Minister of Energy and Electrification. I think it was, 3-4 months ago at this point. He is an incredibly quick study. He knows his brief, so he's well prepared, and he's really good on his feet. He's quick on his feet. Ontarians have already been well served by his short tenure, and I'm sure that the best is yet to come. Minister Lecce was born in Vaughan, Ontario, the son of Italian immigrants who came to Canada in the late 1950s. His first experience in politics came in his hometown of Vaughan, where he was involved in the 1999 election of the late MPP Al Palladini. He was first elected to represent the riding of King Vaughan as the member of provincial parliament in 2018 and has served as the Ontario's Minister of Education from June 2019 till June 2024. Minister Lecce is a community leader who has devoted over half of his life in public service. Is that right? Okay. Was it? I'm sorry. His entire life, I meant, right? So, Minister Lecce, the stage is yours.
The juxtaposition of being, the longest-serving Minister of Education in a generation and getting involved in a campaign in 1999 makes me sort of feel very old this morning. But it's good to be with you. I want to thank Joe Clark for his leadership here at the forum, and obviously, Catherine, thank you for your welcome. And thank you to Joe. Thank you to the Candu team for their leadership at home and abroad. And I have about 5 minutes, so I'm going to just do this off the cuff and really speak to you about the renaissance that is happening in our province and country, but particularly here in Ontario when it comes to the nuclear and energy, the clean, affordable, reliable energy expansion we are leading in this province, and frankly, the envy of the world. Yes, I have been in this ministry for 3 to 4 months, following a tenure of 5 very long years at the Ministry of Education. And I can tell you that in this ministry, everywhere I go, in every foreign capital, in every part of the world, there is an increasing level where the eyes are looking to Ontario as the case study of how to build the social license and ultimately get projects built on time and on budget to sustain our clean energy advantage and frankly to continue to attract investment to our province. Yesterday, I stood with the head of the Independent Electricity Systems Operator, and we announced that the province will require to 2050 an increase of 75% more electricity, more energy to sustain our economy and our population intensification. That is up from 60% just 12 months ago. An unprecedented soar in energy that will be needed not just in Ontario, but in every industrialized economy. And the case study today is to underpin Ontario's advantage, that we have leaned in with a clear plan to build, to generate, to store, and to conserve energy for our industry, our farmers, our agricultural sector, and obviously for our people. And a couple case studies of why we are facing this pressure. I mean, you just heard from Minister Fedeli. We have some of our best agent generals with us, attracting investment, JAG, and many others. I mean, look, the reality is we are an economy that's on fire. I mean, when it comes to attracting FDI to this province, we're hitting upwards of $51 billion in new investment, not in spite of, but because of the clean energy advantage we are leading, where roughly 90% of Ontario's electricity grid is non-emitting, where we have the human capital and the logistical capability, we have the free trade access. These are giving us a value add that allows or enables more investment to flow to Ontario. And we will never say no to those job-creating investments. But the pressures are mounting. I mean, the last year, we will need to power for EV businesses has now doubled. And we're expecting equivalents of power for roughly 2 million homes for just the EV sector. Power for data centers is now up 6 times the forecast that we surmised 1 year ago. And industrial demand is set to increase by 50% over the next 5 years. This is an unprecedented challenge. Most jurisdictions around the world, east and west of us and south, are scrambling for energy. I literally am taking calls from the governor's offices in the United States every day, seeking Canadian or Ontario energy because we have the interties, the infrastructure, we have the capacity to generate more. But obviously our priority is to provide affordable power to Ontarians. And I want to just speak briefly about what we're doing to bridge those gaps, those supply gaps that could emerge, but will not emerge in Ontario because we have a demonstrable, credible plan that is supported by private capital. The first, and perhaps the most notable, is that a few months ago, one of my first acts is we announced Canada's largest competitive energy procurement that will yield roughly 5,000 megawatts of power, equivalent to 5 million homes of energy that we're going to secure through a competitive procurement that is yielding a 30% savings for the taxpayer of Ontario, a contrast with a decision our government has made with governments of the past. That's well underway. We also have a massive undertaking of nuclear expansion in the province. And I want to speak with a great sense of pride because, you heard from Joe at Candu, and these are well-functioning nuclear assets, highly functioning, some among the best in the world. And we know that we need 24-hour, 7 days a week access to reliable power to sustain our industry. And so we're going to be leaning in. We have all the special advantages in the province. 60% of our energy baseload is already from nuclear energy. The population of Ontario, the people of Ontario, are a willing host for nuclear expansion. 65,000 families benefit from this. And we obviously recognize fundamentally that there is no path forward to decarbonization without nuclear energy. And be under no illusions, governments from Germany to many others have come perhaps reluctantly to this realization. And so we knew it instinctively in Ontario. We've known it for generations, and we will lean in as we develop non-emitting forms of affordable and reliable power to complement other forms of energy, be it resources or our significant hydroelectric fleet, as well as our natural gas, which is a critical insurance policy for the province. But we have to look no further than the refurbishments underway, because perhaps what is unique in Ontario is that we are building and refurbishing large-scale nuclear projects on time and on budget. And I'm going to say this again because it's not common in the space, but we are doing something unique. We are building large-scale refurbishments and net new buildings of nuclear assets, as well as the G7's first small modular reactor on time and on budget. And this is our value proposition to the world. And so you look at Bruce and Darlington, we are well underway. Just last week, as you know, the Canadian Nuclear Securities Commission actually extended the life of Pickering for an additional 2 years, which could help safely generate another 2,000 megawatts of power for roughly 2 million people. We have, of course, as I mentioned, the SMRs, we're building 4 of them, the first of which is being constructed beside Darlington, which will roughly generate, when you aggregate the 4, 1,200 megawatts of non-emitting power for the people of Ontario. And at Bruce, we're doing the pre-development work to build the province's first large-scale nuclear reactor, the first in 30 years, the largest of its kind on the continent. We are proud of this leadership because it's allowing us to attract investment and fundamentally keep the rates down and the lights on for our province and for our business. And so we have an ambitious plan. We recognize that we need to do more, even with that competitive procurement and all those nuclear refurbishments and the net new nuclear and the 4 SMRs. The reality, colleagues, is we are going to need to do much, much more to scale up with a higher level of ambition our plan to generate and conserve more energy in the province. And in the coming days, we will outline our vision. And literally next week, we will telegraph with clarity to industry and to the population exactly where we're going to go, what our North Star will be. And the fundamentals that will underpin that plan will be, we'll maintain our clean energy advantage. We will keep the focus on affordability after so many years of economic challenge for families. Just a decade ago, many families in this province were choosing or facing energy poverty policies that were ideological in nature. And we're driven by affordability as our bottom line. And as well with a focus on scaling our energy generation so that we one day will be able to even export it into the US market to displace coal, to generate revenue for Ontarians, to create jobs for our province while we can help with a continental lens to reduce emissions. So we have a real global opportunity today. And I want to welcome the private sector to be part of this incredible enterprise of keeping our grid clean, keeping our economy strong and growing, and keeping energy affordable for our families in Ontario. So it's been an absolute honor to be with you today. I'm grateful for the forum for bringing us together, and I wish you a very successful summit. Thanks so much.
The nuclear super cycle, as Joe called it, is highly dependent on willing and sophisticated utilities who are willing to do the hardest things, like build nuclear power plants. But it's also dependent on the availability of financing and government support, as has been mentioned earlier today, and dependent on the availability of materials and supply chains and fuels for those reactors, and of course, on the availability of human resources and the expertise to be able to build these facilities. So with me, we've got a very impressive panel that can talk about these different assets of this nuclear supercycle. So first, I have Laurent Germain, the CEO of Egis Group, a prominent engineering and consulting firm who have extensive experience in decades of new nuclear projects. I also have George Glasier, Director, President, and CEO of Western Uranium and Vanadium Corporation. I have Wojciech Mosaka, who is the CEO of the Development Bank of Southern Africa. And finally, I have Cosmin Ghita, CEO of Nuclearelectrica. This is the nuclear utility in Romania who are leading the way in nuclear projects. And finally, I have Edey, who is Senior Vice President of Operational Services and Business Development at Bruce Power, the utility who are running the largest nuclear generation station in the world with 8 Candu reactors and with plans to build even more, as we just heard. So with that, I'm gonna start with a couple of questions, and as I ask you these questions, if there's anything else you'd like to add about yourself or your companies, please feel free to start with that. So Cosmin, I'm going to start with you because given what Joe mentioned about the nuclear super cycle, you are going after a whole lot of different nuclear projects in Romania with the refurbishment of Cernavoda 1, plans to build new nuclear, as well as other related infrastructure. So I wonder if you could tell us about why you have such an amazing ambitions, and also about the public support for nuclear power in Romania and what that means to the society.
I would say that, firstly, thank you for inviting me. Romania is on a very good trajectory in terms of developing its nuclear program. We're undergoing a massive challenge after the decarbonization that we're undergoing and the retreat of coal from the lands. I would say that one of the things that we're have always been very proud of is our nuclear program. It's a matter of national pride. We've had very good capacity factors, number 2 and number 1 in the world, thanks to the technology that we're developing, which is Candu, and we're quite interested in moving forward with this and supporting our technologies and our developments. As you know, I believe this reflection is a reflection of the broader global nuclear super cycle we're witnessing and that Joe was mentioning earlier. And we're very engaged in our high impact projects, also around development of medical isotopes, development of tritium that can support fusion in the future, more power output, and maintaining an integrated nuclear fuel cycle in Romania with our mines, our uranium processing capacities, and our fuel factories. So all in all, by 2029, the refurbishment we hope will be complete of Unit 1. Some people call it the Darlington Unit 5. So in terms of the project, and it will give us more power. And in addition to that, we're moving forward with the development of Units 3 and 4 at Cernavoda. These 2 additional reactors will add 1,400 megawatts of capacity by 2032.
Excellent. So, Laurent, if I could turn to you, because Egis obviously has been involved in decades of new nuclear projects. And, a lot of people will sort of generally say these are some of the hardest projects to execute. And, but obviously your firm is not only committed to that, but you're also committed to the Paris climate targets as a company yourselves. So I guess I'm interested in what you can tell me about, overcoming the challenges of executing these extremely complex projects, but also what that means to you as a company that is committed to hitting our climate targets.
Right. I mean, the good news is, why is there momentum now for nuclear? The answer is very simple. Without nuclear, we can not meet the targets in terms of net zero in 2050. It used to be a very controversial subject. It is not anymore. We need to go full speed nuclear. We need to go full speed new renewables if we want to meet these targets. So, of course, this has created momentum, and I think there is a worldwide consensus on this subject. What does it mean for the market? It means that we will at least increase the nuclear production capacity from nuclear by 50% by 2050 in the worst case scenario, and we will triple this production capacity in the, I would say, best case scenario. And you see, new build projects absolutely everywhere in the world. If I take the example of France, France is one of the leading nations in terms of nuclear. My company, Egis, have been working for all the different nuclear plants in France. So we've been working for 50 years on nuclear, on the 54 nuclear plants that we have already in France. And Egis has been chosen by the French government and EDF to be the engineering firm to work on the next 6 new nuclear plants, because the commitment of the government is to build 6 new nuclear plants in France in the next, I would say, 15 to 20 years, with an additional 8 more to be decided in the next years. What are the conditions of success? First condition, HR. We haven't built a lot of new builds for decades. We need to increase the number of engineers able, I would say, to do the studies, and then, of course, the OEMs to build these new builds. That's why, if I take the example of France, all the stakeholders rally together in order to build a university of nuclear. Engaging means so that we increase significantly in the very near future the number of engineers trained on nuclear, first thing. Second thing, we need to reduce the delays of construction. So optimization of the, I would say, work during the construction is key. Digitalization will be at the heart of it, so that the data are shared between the different stakeholders on the construction site much more than before. Third element, replicability. If you want the cost to come down, you need to build a lot of nuclear plants, one after the other, with fewer changes as possible, replication, so that you decrease the cost and the delays.
Wow. So, Jen, I'm sure I would like to turn to you, because I'm sure everything that Laurent is talking about is music to your ears in terms of being able to execute in sophisticated way, replication on time and on budget. So, we have 2 very ambitious utilities with us together. Cosmin talked about all of his plans, but Bruce Power, being the largest generation station in the world, you're already in the process of refurbishing 6 of your 8 reactors. And then you've recently announced plans to build up to 4,800 megawatts more. And obviously we can talk about some of those challenges, but I'm also just interested in terms of Bruce Power looking at their overall ambitions and why, this is such a great economic opportunity for Bruce Power and your shareholders, and why you're so bullish about where the energy markets are headed and what your plans are.
Sure. Thanks, Julianne. Well, I think Minister Lecce really set the stage for the tremendous opportunity in Ontario, and it's going to require a significant investment over the next decade and a half to meet the growing electricity demands and climate targets. And, Ontario produces, in its electricity mix, more than 60% of its power comes from nuclear. So there's already very, very strong recognition that nuclear plays a vital role, not only in our current energy mix, but also in our future energy mix. So Julianne mentioned that that Bruce Power runs on a single site, 8 Candu reactors across 2 plants, Bruce A and Bruce B. And these plants were built in the 70s and 80s. And so we are currently in the process of making tremendous investments in both extending the life of these assets to 2064 and beyond. And I use 2064 as the length of the contract that we've entered into with the province of Ontario. And we're also investing in upgrading our units to get more power out of our existing fleet. So, that's our primary focus over the next number of years. And part of the reason why that's our focus is the safe and successful execution of the nuclear refurbishments in Ontario by Bruce Power and Ontario Power Generation really sets the stage for new nuclear generation and investor confidence. So right now we're delivering our projects on time and on budget, both Bruce Power and Ontario Power Generation. We've completed 1 refurbishment. We're halfway through the second, and we start the third in February of 2025. So we're in a period of time where we're working on overlapping refurbishment projects at the same time. And through this process, we've developed and demonstrated capabilities in strong risk management that is inherent in these mega construction projects. But one of the things that I think has made us really successful is the strong industry collaboration between ourselves, and particularly with Ontario Power Generation. We're sharing all our lessons learned, we're sharing our resources, and really ensures overall industry success, stability for the ratepayers, and also for the electricity system. We're equally vested in each other's success, and it's so important from an investor and public confidence as we start to look at new nuclear generation. But Julianne mentioned that we're starting the opportunity to do an impact assessment on 4,800 megawatts of new generation on the Bruce site. But really, the province also needs power in the short term. And so a couple of years ago, we kicked off a project that we call Project 2030. And that's really about strategically investing in our assets to get more generation out of each unit. And so over the course of about 8 years, and it will sort of end with our last refurbishment, we'll add an additional 700 megawatts to the output of our existing assets. And when you think about that, that's the equivalent of a 9th reactor on our site, and it's at a time when the province really needs our power. And Bruce C. I talked about Bruce A, Bruce B, so new generation is Bruce C. And that's really an opportunity to increase the capacity on our site by 4,800 megawatts of new generation. So the Bruce Power site is a great location for new nuclear. We have operated safely for 40 years. It's a very, very well studied site. There's existing transmission corridors. It's sort of an ideal setup for new nuclear. So we've, for over the past year and a half, been working on the sort of pre-development work for an impact assessment. And the impact assessment is essentially the process you go through to actually get a permit to start to be able to build the site. So we certainly haven't committed to a full project, but recognize that the investment we're making right now in all of these pre-development activities is really about creating optionality as we look to provide a new generation for the province of Ontario. And I think that when we want to think about the areas that we're going to continue to focus on as we're doing this pre-development activities, is we really need to figure out mechanisms of de-risking private sector investment through sort of government-funded mechanisms and policy certainty. We need to keep working with the government on streamlining the siting and regulatory processes to get to market sooner. And, I'll just echo your comments that we really need to be focused on skilled trades, on knowledge workers, and on our supply chain to get us through this energy transition. And specific to Ontario and probably generally Canada is Indigenous participation is going to be a must for new projects in Ontario. So, when we think about Bruce Power, when our owners and Bruce Power took over operation of the Bruce site in 2021, they had a business model where they were running to the end of life, which was around 2018. So if you think about the opportunity that we have ahead of us, we've got contracts to 2064. We're investing billions and billions of dollars every year. We made our foray into medical isotopes, and now we've got new generation in front of us. So very, very busy on site, but we've got a really exciting future.
Excellent. Well, and that's a couple of things you brought up as a good segue. So, Ms. Masako, I would like to ask you, because we talked about the need for financial instruments, for government support. There are market factors, but we've even heard earlier this morning about the fact that, it's not going to be driven all by markets, that there's a really strong need for government and for signaling there. So maybe you could tell us about what's going on in the African market in general, but also about some recent announcements coming out of South Africa about, plans for nuclear power.
Thank you for that question and for the opportunity to be here. This is a very exciting time that we live in, and the conversation around nuclear being heightened in this age of us, transitioning into cleaner fuels is a critical one. When one looks at the continental context, I mean, the OECD principles are clear. It's firstly, there must be access, it must be affordable. Then one needs to consider the decarbonization elements. When you look at the continent where I come from, which is the continent of Africa, is a continent of opportunity in that there's 600 million people without access to power. The continent has aspirations of industrializing to take advantage of the critical minerals opportunity. South Africa specifically is looking at reindustrialization as well. And thirdly, it's actually making sure that clean cooking methodologies are adopted. So this actually, shows that there's a need, for energy. However, the opportunity is that with the available technologies that are available, there is opportunity to actually roll out and implement clean energy. When you look at the sources of energy across the continent, we are blessed with sun, as a continent. So solar is definitely plays a critical part. South Africa, on the other hand, which is the most industrialized, sits with coal, and we have 1.9 gig of nuclear power as well. You see geothermal in Kenya. There is hydropower. There's gas on the continent. So all of these sources are available, on the continent to provide clean energy. And specifically on South Africa, we currently have our draft integrated resource plan that has been issued by our Ministry of Energy, where South Africa is looking to actually increase its nuclear capability. I think it's about 10,500 megawatts that South Africa is looking at new build, in the next few years to enhance energy security. Now, when you look at all of these aspects, you also look at the challenges, right, within the continent where, most countries are indebted, the challenge of the cost of funds on the continent, the perception of risk, that is there. I mean, when you look at a developing country on the continent, they will probably spend 4 times more, in terms of cost of capital than in a developed country. And with these systemic challenges, we will not meet the net zero targets, because we have to address these systemic issues that talk to cost of capital, because we need to address that so that we can be able to fund all of these projects that we're looking at on the continent. What we have seen is the role that, for instance, a development finance institution can play is to create, working together with government to create that enabling environment. Government, as she also has mentioned, the policy uncertainty. So creating policy certainty is critical, and we have seen that work extremely well in South Africa with our renewable program, where there was a collaboration between ourselves as a development finance institution and our government when we developed an independent power producer program. We saw that program, implementing, I think there's an investment of more than 30 billion US dollars that has been made in renewable energy in South Africa alone. And most of those projects are private it's privately owned generation guaranteed by the state. But you see, now with all of these fiscal constraints, with the new builds, it's going to be critical that new models, are then envisioned. So the role of the DFI then would then be what are the guarantees structures that one can put in place to actually ensure that there is private sector participation when it comes to to new builds, the de-risking elements around also the money we put forward from a project preparation perspective as well. So these are the opportunities, that we are seeing as a role that that we have played and we will continue to play to then ensure that there's adequate support to enable private sector participation in ensuring energy security for the continent. And this is a collaborative approach that many of the DFIs on the continent are doing, and also the multilateral development banks, providing that support in the creation of these guarantee funds and guarantee vehicles, so that we can enable private sector participation. Thank you.
Well, that's an excellent, and I wonder if I can just quickly ask you, Cosmin, because I know that, these types of, export development financing and different financial instruments have been very important in terms of Romania's ability to go forward with all of your ambitions. I wonder if there's anything else you'd like to add about the level of government support and intergovernmental support from exporting countries.
I think right now, in terms of financing, the ECAs are still the best bet. Obviously, we're looking at a lot of private equity and capital that's looking to be developed and deployed, simply because of the long grace period that's offered. One of the things that the OECD stands in conjuncture to be able to challenge the rest of the non-OECD countries, with which there's a strong competition for industry, I would say, is down payment requirements. And during the COVID, there's been a relaxation to allow for less equity contribution, so around 5% in that sense. And during the Ukraine crisis, and maintaining that for clean energy infrastructure, nuclear can potentially be something that allows for better and more competitive exports. At the same time, I would say that understanding risk appropriately and educating financial investors around risk is important, so that we can get a real appreciation, so to speak, of the and banks of the true risks of a nuclear project. Usually, the scare of cost overruns asks for a lot of insurance mechanisms, a lot of which might not necessarily be necessary. So having a right understanding, and I think this is going to be the theme for next year, is developing actuarial models for risk purposes. It would be quite important.
Laurent, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think the market is evolving, and yes, for the large, nuclear plants, there will be a lot of public money required. But now, emerging is the SMR markets with more than 70 projects of SMR, where that requires lower capex, so the private sector can invest on that kind of nuclear reactors, which of course they could not in very big reactors. So lower capex. And a high level, by the way, of cost minimization in terms of waste, management in the SMR. So the beauty of the nuclear markets right now is that there is not only one product, that can be sold to the market, but the number of different, nuclear plants that can be built is much more diverse, with the possibility of financing by the private sector,
We say
which
big
is
and
increased.
small, we need them all.
Absolutely.
So, George, I would be remiss though if we didn't talk about the fundamental minerals that are required to drive these clean energy transitions. And obviously with, you mine uranium, but also vanadium. And I wonder if you could first tell us what vanadium is, what it's used for, but then, as we're talking about nuclear, tell us a little bit about what's going on with, the uranium markets, what is going to be required to support this nuclear supercycle. And if you could also comment about, the importance of, energy sovereignty and being able to control uranium enrichment for those technologies that require it, because I think a lot of folks know the most enriched uranium is coming from Russia at the moment. So over to you.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit about vanadium. Most people don't know what vanadium is, but vanadium is used primarily, the use of vanadium is to harden steel. It's an alloy for steel. But the new use for vanadium is the redox battery, a battery that's as big as a house that stores massive amounts of electricity from solar, from wind. The type of electricity that doesn't produce all the time needs to be stored. Well, the redox battery does that. A redox battery will not catch on fire. It can be charged and discharged at the same time. The electrolyte can be reprocessed. It doesn't wear out. So this is a battery concept that won't be in your cell phone. It probably won't be in your car, but it certainly is a new technology for storage of large amounts of electricity. China is building a lot of these. The U.S. is building a few. We'll see if it takes off, but that's the secondary use. Vanadium will primarily be used still, to alloy steel. So that's kind of a background of vanadium. On the uranium issue and the fuel for the nuclear cycle, which we need, we talk about the front end of the nuclear cycle. That involves the mining of the uranium, the conversion of it for the enrichment process, if you need to enrich it, the enrichment, and then the fuel fabrication. That we call the front end of the cycle. What happens in this industry, we've been up and down. Obviously, back in 2004, 2005, the industry started back because the world looked like it would be undersupplied with uranium fuel. Well, what happened is the industry started to gear up to produce for the existing reactors, not a lot of new builds, but for the existing reactors. And what happened, obviously, that boom was killed by the Fukushima disaster in Japan. And that really put the kibosh on expanding nuclear fuel production around the world. The world had plenty of uranium, and with the Japanese no longer needing the uranium for their reactors, shutting down virtually all of their reactors overnight, the fuel cycle was really stressed out at that point. So any expansion of the fuel cycle was put on hold for years. Going back, the uranium price after the 3 Mile Island, I've been in this industry since before 3 Mile Island. That was a real boom at that time until 3 Mile Island happened, and then the price constantly went down. We got a price of uranium, the natural uranium, below $10 a pound, and it stayed there for years and years and years until the boom in, let's say 2004 to 2007, the price went from $10 up to $130 a pound, but it didn't stay there, obviously. So the price after Fukushima dropped back down considerably. And now the price is up. The spot price of uranium is about $80, and the price of conversion, the price of enrichment have all gone up substantially. So now we can look at expanding the fuel cycle. That to meet the demands of the existing fleet is one thing, but if we're going to build all of these new reactors, which it looks like we are, the fuel cycle industry needs to gear up. We need to be ready to do it. And there's a lot of uranium around the world. There's uranium in Africa. There's uranium in Romania. It's not a scarce commodity by a long shot. There's a lot of uranium in Canada. There's uranium in the U.S. But the issue is you've got to build these mines and these facilities to process the uranium, which takes years and years. Just permitting mines in Canada, the U.S., and other places, from the time you find the deposit to the time you can actually have a product that you can sell to the utilities may take you 15 years.
Yeah, it's like a nuclear plant.
Yeah, and so we need to gear up. As an industry, we need to gear up and start doing that. And I think we are doing. And talk a little bit about the enrichment. The enrichment has been a real problem because in the U.S. just recently, the U.S. Congress and the president basically passed a ban on bringing Russian uranium in. The Russians control about 40% of the enrichment of uranium in the world. And by banning that, now the ban goes into effect in 2028 in the U.S. Theoretically, it's in effect now, but the utilities have a right to ask for waivers if they need the uranium for the short period of time. But what are we going to do if the Russians aren't supplying the uranium, especially to the U.S.? The U.S. is still the largest consumer of uranium in the world. You know, we consume over 50 million pounds of natural uranium, which has all of our reactors virtually have to be enriched. We don't have Candu. Candus don't need the enrichment, but all of the reactors around the world, except Candu, need enrichment, and we just don't have enough enrichment capacity around the world. And so that's going to be one of the issues. And the U.S. government has just recently allocated billions of dollars to build new enrichments. And the French actually have committed to build new enrichments. So the enrichment cycle is coming along slowly. Might mention also for the SMRs need a higher enriched level than the big reactors that we have in operation now. And only the Russians, for commercial purposes, only the Russians can produce that enriched uranium. We don't have the capacity to enrich those levels. We have to build that capacity if we're going to bring these SMRs on. We've got to have that enrichment capacity. And so that'll be a challenge, but it can be done. And there's new technologies coming out. Of course, the new technologies, centrifuges are much better than the old gaseous diffusion. The lasers may come on. There may be new technologies for enrichment. The mining of uranium is about the same as it's been for the last 50 years. It's either open pit mining, underground mining. There's some new developments in mining technology, remote controlled machines. Obviously, we've got the challenges, everybody, of labor, the equipment availability, but the industry is ready to gear up to meet the reactor demands for the existing fleet plus the new ones that we hope will be built.
Yep. Well, and I would, again, be remiss if we didn't talk about, you brought up some new innovations in different processes. So, and in the last few minutes that we've got here, I would sort of like to open it up to talk about what are some of the innovations that are helping, you know, each of you achieve your goals. So maybe Jen, I could start with you. If you could talk about some of the innovations, some of the new technologies that Bruce Power is employing.
Sure. Well, why don't I just focus on another Candu superpower? You talked about natural uranium with Candus, but another superpower of Candus are their ability to produce medical isotopes and short-lived medical isotopes. And many don't associate medical isotopes with nuclear power, but in fact, reactors are one of the key sources of medical isotopes, but is primarily research reactors. And for decades, Canada has actually been a leader in research, development, and production of isotopes. Bruce Power has been producing medical isotopes for almost 40 years through the production of cobalt-60 in our Bruce B units, and cobalt-60 is used for medical sterilization, and more recently it's being used in brain tumor and breast cancer for treatment of brain tumors and breast cancer through non-invasive treatments. But 2 years ago, we started commercially irradiating lutetium-177, which is a short-lived medical isotope used to treat prostate cancer. And this was the first time that a short-lived medical isotope was commercially produced in a power reactor. And that's really a game changer for the industry, because now we can produce medical isotopes very reliably, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and at scale. And lutetium-177 is expected to be a workhorse of the radiopharmaceuticals for treating cancer. And there's a whole pipeline of clinical trials using lutetium-177 for now treating different types of cancers as well. And we did this very innovative initiative in partnership with Isogen, and Isogen's a partnership between Kinetrix and Framatome, and they're very key vendor partners for us in the nuclear industry. And we also used this opportunity and partnered with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, and we partnered with them through a revenue sharing agreement that directly benefits the community. And you know, there are so many clinical trials out there, radiopharmaceuticals is on the forefront of the next wave of how we're treating cancer. And it's really, really, really exciting and thrilling to be part of this. But it also represents an opportunity for us to look at nuclear power differently, right? It's not just providing electricity, it's now also fueling the medical industry and treating cancer. So it's a very exciting innovation for us.
That's incredible. And Cosmin, you also brought up, tritium, which is another, nuclear byproduct that is now, geared to fuel fusion reactors of the future. So with that, I would like to thank all of our panelists. I wish we actually had more time because there's so many questions I'd like to ask, but I'm sure everybody's getting ready for their lunch. So thank you very much for being with us today. And I will turn it back over to you. Thank you so much.